Have you ever found yourself tangled in a romantic connection that included physical intimacy, yet something about it felt different from what you'd experienced before? Perhaps there were moments when everything seemed perfect, when you felt like you were floating on air, only to find yourself suddenly plunged into emotional darkness just days or even hours later. This roller coaster of feelings, this constant oscillation between euphoria and despair, indicate something more complex than typical relationship struggles. What you could be experiencing is what mental health professionals describe as an unhealthy emotional attachment that forms through repeated cycles of conflicting experiences where moments of tenderness become entangled with episodes of mistreatment. These kinds of connections develop when someone experiences a pattern of positive reinforcement mixed with negative treatment, creating a powerful psychological pull that becomes incredibly difficult to resist. The human brain, in its attempt to make sense of these contradictory experiences, forms strong neural pathways that keep drawing you back to the source of both pleasure and pain. Physical intimacy becomes woven into this pattern. The attachment intensifies exponentially, making the connection feel almost impossible to sever. Body's release of bonding hormones during intimate moments creates additional layers of attachment that override logical thinking and self-preservation instincts. Understanding these dynamics requires looking at various warning indicators that mental health experts have identified through years of research and clinical observation. These signs don't always appear all at once, and they might not be immediately obvious, especially when you're emotionally invested in the relationship. What seems like passion and intensity in the early stages gradually reveals itself to be something far more troubling. The challenge lies in recognizing these patterns while you're still caught up in them, when your emotions are running high and your judgment might be clouded by hope, attachment, and the intermittent positive experiences that keep you believing things will improve. One of the earliest indicators that something might be developing in an unhealthy direction involves the pace at which things progress. In the beginning stages of getting to know someone, there's typically a natural rhythm to how relationships unfold. You spend time learning about each other's interests, backgrounds, values, and daily routines. You discover what makes them laugh, what their goals and dreams involve, how they treat other people in their lives. Their character truly consists of beneath the initial presentation they offer. This process of genuine discovery usually takes time, both people to reveal themselves gradually and authentically. However, someone pushes for physical intimacy before this foundation has been established, before you've really had the chance to know who they are as a person. It can signal an underlying agenda. Begin making suggestions or dropping hints about sexual activity surprisingly early in your interactions. Perhaps during your first few conversations, when you're still learning basic information about each other, they're already steering discussions toward intimate topics or making assumptions about where things are heading physically. This rush toward physical connection before emotional intimacy has developed naturally creates an imbalance in the relationship from the very start. While some relationships do develop quickly and genuinely, and not every fast moving connection is problematic, there's a distinction between mutual enthusiasm and one person pushing the pace. When someone is deliberately accelerating things, especially regarding physical intimacy, they're often trying to establish a connection that will make you more vulnerable to manipulation later. The intensity of early physical involvement can create feelings of obligation, can make you feel like you've already invested so much that you can't back out now, can blur your ability to see red flags that would otherwise be obvious. These rapid-fire relationships often include what researchers call an initial overwhelming phase, where the other person floods you with attention, compliments, gifts, and declarations of deep feeling. They might tell you they've never felt this way before, that you're different from everyone else. They've known that you're their soulmate or the person they've been searching for their entire life. This bombardment of positive attention feels intoxicating, especially if you've experienced rejection or loneliness in the past. Your rational mind might be sending up cautious signals, suggesting that this level of intensity isn't sustainable or healthy, but the emotional high drowns out those warnings. Before you've had time to really process what's happening or to evaluate whether this person is truly compatible with you on a deeper level, physical intimacy enters the picture. This progression isn't accidental. By establishing a sexual connection early, before you've built genuine trust and understanding, they create a powerful hook that makes it much harder for you to walk away later when problems emerge. The combination of emotional intensity and physical intimacy in such a compressed time frame essentially shortcuts the normal process of relationship development, leaving you bonded to someone you barely know. Another critical warning sign emerges in how your partner communicates about your intimate life together. In relationships built on mutual respect and genuine care, both people feel comfortable expressing their desires, preferences, and boundaries. These conversations might feel a bit awkward initially, especially if you're not used to being so open about such personal matters, but they're conducted with kindness and consideration. A caring partner might express appreciation when you do something they particularly enjoy, gently suggest trying something new, always respecting your comfort level and never pressuring you to do anything that makes you uncomfortable. The language used in these healthy conversations focuses on shared pleasure and mutual satisfaction. I really enjoyed when we did that, or would you be interested in exploring this together? Indicate a partnership where both people's experiences matter equally. There's an underlying assumption that intimacy is something you create together, not something one person does to or for the other. When concerns arise, they're addressed with sensitivity and a genuine desire to make things better for both of you. In contrast, when an unhealthy dynamic is present, criticism about your intimate performance becomes a weapon used to undermine your confidence and self-worth. Instead of gentle suggestions aimed at mutual enjoyment, you hear harsh judgments designed to make you feel inadequate. Comments like, "You don't know what you're doing," or "I've had much better," or "Anyone else would be able to satisfy me," cut deep because they strike at a vulnerable aspect of your identity. These aren't observations meant to help you grow together as a couple. Calculated attacks intended to damage your self-esteem and make you feel grateful that this person is willing to be with you despite your supposed inadequacies. The impact of these degrading remarks extends far beyond hurt feelings. Over time, this constant criticism fundamentally changes your relationship with physical intimacy itself. Something that should be a source of joy, connection, and mutual pleasure transforms into a source of anxiety and dread. You find yourself dreading intimate moments rather than looking forward to them, constantly worried about making mistakes or failing to meet expectations. Your mind becomes consumed with trying to figure out what they want, guessing every movement and response, unable to relax and be present in the experience. This anxiety manifests physically as well. Notice that your interest in physical intimacy diminishes significantly. Where you once felt natural desire and enthusiasm, now you feel nothing but worry and stress. This decrease in desire isn't about your inherent sexuality or attraction to your partner. It's your body's protective response to an emotionally unsafe situation. Your nervous system has learned that intimate moments lead to criticism, and rejection begins shutting down those impulses as a form of self-preservation. Yet even as your body tries to protect you by reducing desire, you might feel guilty about this change, adding another layer of distress to an already painful situation. The confusion deepens when you realize that your sense of self-worth has become entirely dependent on your partner's changing moods and reactions. One day they might be pleased with you, showering you with affection and approval, and you feel on top of the world. You feel attractive, capable, worthy of love and respect. But then the next day, or even later that same day, their demeanor shifts completely. You can do nothing right. The same behaviors that earned praise yesterday now provoke irritation or contempt. This unpredictability keeps you constantly off balance, never quite sure where you stand or how to act. What makes this pattern particularly insidious is that your brain begins to adapt to this unpredictability in ways that strengthen rather than weaken the attachment. Psychologists have identified this mechanism as a powerful form of conditioning. When rewards come at unpredictable intervals, when you never know whether your actions will lead to affection or rejection, your brain becomes hypervigilant, constantly scanning for signals about what might work this time. The occasional moments of approval and affection, precisely because they're unpredictable and intermittent, become incredibly powerful motivators. Think about how a slot machine works. People become captivated by them not despite their unpredictability, but because of it. The occasional win, coming at random intervals, triggers a dopamine response in the brain that makes you want to keep trying, convinced that the next attempt might be the one that pays off. Relationship begins operating on this same principle. The intermittent rewards of affection, approval, intimate connection keep you hooked, constantly hoping that if you just try harder, adjust your behavior more precisely, figure out the right formula, you'll be able to bring back those good moments and make them last. This creates a devastating cycle where, despite recognizing that the relationship causes you pain, despite knowing intellectually that you deserve better treatment, you find yourself unable to break away. Your need for their approval becomes all-consuming. You reshape your behavior, your appearance, your opinions, even your relationships with friends and family in an attempt to become the version of yourself that will earn consistent love and acceptance. Yet no matter how much you change or how hard you try, the pattern continues because the problem doesn't actually lie with your behavior, lies with the fundamental dynamic of the relationship itself. Breaking free from this cycle requires First, acknowledging that it exists, which is often the hardest step. When you're caught in these patterns, they can feel normal, especially if you've experienced similar dynamics in past relationships or in your family of origin. You might tell yourself that all relationships have ups and downs, that passionate connections naturally involve intense emotions. Your partner's criticism comes from a place of wanting you to be your best self. These rationalizations, while understandable, prevent you from seeing the situation clearly and taking steps to protect yourself. Establishing and maintaining firm boundaries becomes essential, though it's rarely easy. Boundaries mean deciding what treatment you will and won't accept, what behaviors cross lines for you, and what you need in order to feel safe and respected in an intimate relationship. These boundaries need to be both emotional and physical. You have the right to refuse intimate activities that make you uncomfortable, to expect respectful communication even during disagreements, maintain connections with friends and family, to have privacy and autonomy in your decision making, and to be treated with basic kindness and consideration at all times. Communicating these boundaries clearly and standing firm when they're tested requires courage, especially when you're dealing with someone who has already demonstrated a pattern of manipulation and control. They may react badly to your assertion of boundaries, accusing you of being difficult, unreasonable, or unloving. They might escalate their negative behavior temporarily in an attempt to make you back down. Or they might promise to change, temporarily more considerate and respectful, only to gradually return to the same problematic patterns once you've relaxed your guard. Understanding that these reactions are themselves part of the problematic dynamic helps you maintain your resolve rather than questioning whether you're being too demanding or expecting too much. Another dimension of these unhealthy attachments involves the strategic use of physical intimacy as a system of rewards and punishments. In relationships built on genuine affection and mutual respect, physical intimacy flows naturally from emotional connection and mutual desire. Both people want to be close to each other because they enjoy that closeness and the feelings of connection it creates. The intimate aspects of the relationship exist as an expression of the bond you share, not as a commodity to be granted or withheld based on behavior. When someone uses intimacy as a tool for control, the entire dynamic shifts into something transactional and manipulative. After moments when you've pleased them, when you've behaved in ways they approve of, or given them what they wanted, they become physically affectionate and available. The sex might be particularly intense and satisfying during these times, creating powerful positive associations that reinforce whatever behavior earned you this reward. Your brain learns to connect compliance with physical pleasure and emotional closeness, making you more likely to comply again in the future. When you've displeased them somehow, you've asserted a boundary or failed to meet their expectations, or simply fallen victim to their unpredictable mood swings, withdraw completely. They become cold, distant, unresponsive to your attempts at physical connection. This withdrawal feels like rejection at the deepest level because physical intimacy, especially in established relationships, represents acceptance and belonging. When it's suddenly withheld, especially without clear explanation or in ways that feel disproportionate to whatever supposedly triggered it, you're left feeling confused, abandoned, and desperate to restore the connection. The drastic swings between these two states create intense emotional whiplash. During the positive phases, things can feel absolutely wonderful. Your partner is attentive, affectionate, sexually engaged, and the relationship seems to be everything you hoped for. These highs feel so good, such a rush of positive emotions and bonding hormones, that they can overshadow the painful lows in your memory. When you're experiencing those peak moments, the previous pain fades into the background, and you convince yourself that this is the real relationship, while the difficult times are just temporary aberrations that will eventually stop happening. This selective memory, combined with the neurochemical cocktail released during intimate positive experiences, makes it incredibly difficult to maintain an accurate assessment of the relationship's overall health. You might find yourself minimizing or excusing the negative aspects, telling yourself that the good times outweigh the bad. Every relationship has challenges that your partner's positive qualities make up for their harmful behaviors. You focus on potential and promises rather than on actual patterns and demonstrated character, always believing that if you can just get through this rough patch, everything will finally stabilize into sustained happiness. The use of physical intimacy as a conflict resolution tool represents yet another problematic pattern that can emerge in these dynamics. Arguments and disagreements are inevitable in any relationship where two distinct individuals with different backgrounds, perspectives, needs are trying to build a life together. Couples handle these conflicts reveals a great deal about the relationship's health and sustainability. In functional relationships, conflicts are addressed through honest communication, active listening, willingness to compromise, and mutual efforts to understand each other's perspectives and find solutions that work for both people. Physical intimacy becomes the default method for resolving conflicts. Several problems arise. First, it creates a pattern of avoiding difficult conversations and glossing over genuine issues that need to be addressed. After a heated argument, sex might temporarily relieve the tension and create a feeling of reconnection, but it doesn't actually resolve whatever caused the argument in the first place. Those underlying issues remain unaddressed, lurking beneath the surface, ready to erupt again the next time circumstances trigger them. Over time, this leads to an accumulation of unresolved problems that make the relationship increasingly unstable. Second, using sex to smooth over conflicts can create a confusing association between conflict and physical intimacy that distorts both. You might begin to subconsciously escalate conflicts because you've learned that they lead to intense, intimate encounters. You might find yourself unable to express legitimate grievances because you've been conditioned to see conflict resolution and physical connection as inherently linked. This prevents the development of healthy communication patterns and emotional processing skills that are essential for long-term relationship success. This pattern creates a false sense of intimacy and resolution. In the aftermath of physically reconnecting, you might feel like you've bridged the emotional gap between you and that everything is okay. Now, the flood of bonding hormones released during intimate contact makes you feel close and connected. This biochemical closeness isn't the same as genuine emotional intimacy built on honest communication, vulnerability, mutual understanding. You're experiencing a chemical simulation of emotional resolution without actually doing the work of resolving anything. This counterfeit intimacy becomes increasingly hollow over time as the pattern repeats and the same issues keep resurfacing without ever being truly addressed. The powerful and vulnerable nature of physical intimacy makes this pattern particularly effective at maintaining unhealthy attachments. Sex involves a level of physical and emotional vulnerability that few other experiences match. In those moments, you're literally and figuratively exposed to another person, trusting them with your body and often with emotions and needs that you might not express in other contexts. This vulnerability creates opportunities for deep bonding, but in an unhealthy dynamic, it also creates opportunities for exploitation and manipulation. Someone with harmful intentions gains access to you in these vulnerable states. They can exploit that openness to further entrench the unhealthy attachment. The combination of physical pleasure, emotional vulnerability, and the neurochemical processes activated during intimate contact creates such powerful, positive feelings that they can override your rational assessment of the relationship. Even when you're able to see clearly during non-intimate moments that the relationship is damaging, those moments of physical connection can flood your system with feelings that make the relationship seem worth preserving. Your body's responses betray your mind's better judgment, keeping you tethered to someone who ultimately causes you harm. This creates the painful irony where the very thing that feels most like love and connection is actually the mechanism binding you to a harmful situation. The intensity of the physical and emotional experiences you share makes the attachment feel profound and meaningful, even sacred. You might believe that the depth of feeling you experience during intimate moments reveals the relationship's true nature, while the painful and destructive aspects are just surface problems that don't reflect the deeper bond you share. This perspective inverts reality, mistaking the symptoms of an unhealthy attachment for evidence of true love. Perhaps one of the most challenging aspects of these dynamics is the tendency to overlook, minimize, rationalize behaviors that should raise serious concerns, even when you're aware of warning signs, even when friends or family express worry, even when you've read descriptions of unhealthy relationships that sound uncannily familiar. You might find yourself making excuses for your partner's behavior or convincing yourself that your situation is different. This isn't because you're foolish or weak. It's because the attachment itself affects your ability to think clearly about the relationship. Several psychological mechanisms contribute to this clouded judgment. First, there's the natural human tendency toward consistency. Once you've invested time, emotion, energy, and intimacy in a relationship, admitting that it's fundamentally unhealthy means acknowledging that all that investment was misplaced. This feels wasteful and painful. Your mind resists this conclusion, instead searching for ways to justify continuing despite the problems. You've already put so much into this. Walking away would mean accepting that none of it led anywhere positive. Second, there's often a genuine desire to see the best in people you care about, particularly people you've been intimate with. Maintaining a sexual relationship with someone while simultaneously viewing them as harmful or manipulative creates intense cognitive dissonance that your mind tries to resolve. It's psychologically easier to find explanations for their behavior that preserve their essential goodness than to accept that you've been vulnerable with someone who doesn't have your best interests at heart. Attribute their hurtful actions to a difficult childhood, past traumas, stress from work, or any number of external factors, telling yourself that underneath it all, they're a good person who cares about you. Third, many people caught in these dynamics engage in a pattern of self-blame that deflects attention from their partner's problematic behavior. You might convince yourself that if you were more attractive, more understanding, less demanding, better at anticipating their needs, or different in any number of ways, the relationship would improve. This self-blame serves several functions. It gives you a sense of control, suggesting that if you can just change yourself sufficiently, you can fix the relationship. Protects you from the scary reality that you're involved with someone whose behavior you can't control and who may not be willing or able to treat you well, regardless of what you do. And it aligns with messages your partner has likely been sending about how their negative behavior is really your fault, a response to your inadequacies or mistakes. Fourth, there's often hope based on intermittent positive behavior. Your partner isn't cruel and manipulative every single moment. There are times when they're kind, attentive, apologetic, and genuinely seem to care about you. During these positive interludes, they might acknowledge their previous bad behavior and promise to change. They might offer explanations for why they acted as they did and describe how things will be different going forward. These promises of change create hope that if you just hold on through the difficult times, the relationship will eventually stabilize into consistent positive behavior. Unfortunately, truly unhealthy dynamics characterized by these attachment patterns, these promises rarely lead to lasting change. The person might genuinely believe in the moment that they'll behave differently without serious self-examination and often professional help. Ingrained patterns of relating to others don't simply disappear because someone wishes they would. More often, what follows is a temporary improvement during which they're on their best behavior by a gradual return to the same problematic patterns. Each time this cycle repeats, it provides just enough hope to keep you engaged while nothing fundamentally changes. The difficulty of recognizing these warning signs while you're experiencing them cannot be overstated. These unhealthy attachments genuinely cloud your judgment and distort your perceptions. The intense emotions, the physical intimacy, intermittent positive experiences, the hope for change, and the various psychological mechanisms that resist acknowledging painful truths all work together to keep you locked in place. Looking at a list of warning signs might seem straightforward from the outside, but when you're living through these experiences, when you're emotionally bonded to the other person, when you're invested in the relationship's success, when you're experiencing the constant ups and downs that characterize these dynamics, clarity becomes elusive. This is why external perspectives often prove so valuable, even though they can be difficult to hear. Friends and family who care about you but aren't caught up in the relationship's emotional intensity can often see patterns that you're too close to recognize. When multiple people who know you well express concern about how you're being treated or about changes they've noticed in you since entering the relationship, observations deserve serious consideration, even though your first instinct might be to defend your partner or dismiss their worries as misunderstanding the situation. Changes in yourself provide another important indicator. Have you noticed shifts in your behavior, emotional state, self-esteem, or relationships with others since becoming involved with this person? Do you feel more anxious, more self-doubting, isolated from your support network? Have you stopped engaging in activities you used to enjoy, spending time with friends and family you were once close to, or pursuing goals that were previously important to you? Do you find yourself constantly walking on eggshells, monitoring your behavior to avoid triggering your partner's displeasure, or feeling responsible for managing their emotions and reactions? These changes don't happen overnight. They accumulate gradually as the relationship progresses and the unhealthy patterns become more entrenched. Looking back to who you were before this relationship and honestly comparing that to who you are now can provide clarity that's difficult to achieve when you're focused only on the relationship itself. If the changes represent a diminishment of your well-being, confidence, autonomy, and connections with others, that's a powerful signal that something is seriously wrong, regardless of how intense and meaningful the relationship might feel. Acknowledging that you're caught in one of these unhealthy attachment patterns doesn't mean you're weak, naive, or at fault for the situation. These dynamics are psychologically powerful and can entrap anyone regardless of their intelligence, life experience, previous relationship history. Manipulative people are often skilled at identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities, presenting themselves in ways designed to appeal to you specifically, and creating situations that foster these intense attachments. The fact that you've become caught in such a dynamic says nothing negative about you. It speaks only to the manipulative skill of the other person and the inherently compelling nature of these psychological patterns. What matters more than how you ended up in this situation is what you do once you've recognized it. Breaking free from these attachments is rarely easy. The bond feels incredibly strong, even stronger than bonds in healthier relationships might feel, precisely because of the intense emotional experiences and the unpredictable reinforcement patterns that have shaped your attachment. You may feel like you can't imagine life without this person, like no one else will ever make you feel the way they do during the good moments. You're abandoning them when they need you, or like you're giving up on something that could still work out. All of these feelings are understandable, but they're also part of the attachment pattern itself. The intensity you feel isn't evidence that this relationship is right for you. It's evidence of how effectively these dynamics have bound you to an unhealthy situation. The fear of life without them, the sense that no one else will compare, pull to stay despite the harm, are all predictable consequences of the psychological mechanisms at work. Recognizing these feelings as products of the unhealthy dynamic rather than as valid indicators of the relationship's value helps you maintain perspective as you work toward freeing yourself. Taking steps to protect yourself might involve setting firmer boundaries, reducing contact, ending the relationship entirely, seeking support from friends and family, or working with a therapist who specializes in relationship trauma and unhealthy attachment patterns. Each person's situation is unique, and the right path forward depends on your specific circumstances, the severity of the manipulation and harm you're experiencing, your available support systems, and your readiness to make changes. There's no single timeline or approach that works for everyone, and it's important to be patient with yourself as you navigate this difficult process. Professional support can be particularly valuable because therapists trained in these areas can help you understand the dynamics at work, identify the psychological hooks keeping you attached, develop strategies for maintaining boundaries or leaving the relationship, process the complex emotions that arise, and rebuild your sense of self that may have been damaged during the relationship. Provide an objective perspective unclouded by emotional attachment and can help you see patterns and connections you might miss on your own. From friends and family matters enormously as well, even though you might feel embarrassed or ashamed about the situation or resistant to hearing criticism of your partner. People who care about you want to help, and allowing them to support you rather than isolating yourself creates a counterbalance to the relationship's pull. Their consistent care and regard for you can help remind you of your worth when your self-esteem has been eroded by constant criticism and manipulation. Their perspective can provide reality checks when you find yourself minimizing or rationalizing harmful behavior. And their practical support can make the logistics of extricating yourself from the relationship more manageable. Rebuilding your life after recognizing and leaving one of these unhealthy attachments involves both practical and emotional work. Practically, you may need to establish physical distance, block or limit communication channels, change routines or environments that remind you of the person, create new structures that support your well-being rather than drawing you back into old patterns. Emotionally, you'll likely need to process grief, anger, confusion, and a complex mix of other feelings about the relationship and its end. You'll need to reconstruct your sense of self apart from this person's opinions and reactions, reestablish connections that may have been damaged or neglected during the relationship, and learn to trust your own judgment again. This recovery process takes time, often more time than you might expect or hope. The intensity of these attachments means they don't dissolve quickly, even after the relationship ends. You might find yourself missing the person intensely, romanticizing the good times while minimizing the bad, convincing yourself that maybe it wasn't really that unhealthy, or feeling tempted to reach out or respond if they contact you. These are all normal parts of the recovery process, not signs that you've made a mistake in leaving. The attachment pattern doesn't switch off the moment you recognize it as unhealthy. Those neural pathways take time to weaken as you build new patterns of relating to yourself and others. Being gentle with yourself during this process matters enormously. You might feel frustrated with yourself for having stayed so long, for missing someone who harmed you, for the mistakes you made within the relationship, or for how hard it is to move forward. Compassion rather than self-judgment will serve you better. Everyone deserves relationships characterized by mutual respect, consistent kindness, healthy communication, and genuine care for each other's well-being. Recognizing that you deserve better and taking steps to create a life that reflects that recognition represents strength and growth, not weakness or failure. Understanding these dynamics also helps protect you in future relationships. Once you've learned to recognize the warning signs, you're better equipped to identify problematic patterns early before becoming deeply attached. You can notice when someone is pushing for intimacy before trust and genuine connection have developed. Criticism is being used as a weapon rather than as constructive communication. When your self-worth is becoming dependent on someone else's approval, when physical intimacy is being used manipulatively, when you're being encouraged to overlook behaviors that trouble you. This awareness doesn't mean you'll never be vulnerable to these patterns again. It does mean you're more likely to recognize and respond to them before becoming deeply entangled. Building relationships with people who demonstrate consistent respect, who communicate openly and honestly, who take responsibility for their own emotions and behaviors, who respect your boundaries, who support your connections with others and your individual growth, and who treat physical intimacy as an expression of genuine care rather than as a tool for manipulation creates an entirely different experience. Healthy relationships certainly have their challenges and conflicts. These are navigated through communication and mutual effort rather than through cycles of intensity and manipulation. The emotional experience is more stable, less dramatic, but ultimately more nourishing and sustainable. People worry that without the intense highs and lows, relationships will feel boring or less passionate. This concern reflects how these unhealthy patterns can distort our understanding of what healthy relationships feel like. Intensity and health are not the same thing. Roller coasters and whiplash might be intense, but they're not actually good for you. Genuine passion can exist within relationships built on stability and respect. It doesn't require manipulation and emotional turmoil to be real or meaningful. In fact, many people discover that once they experience relationships without these problematic dynamics, they feel far more fulfilled despite, or perhaps because of the reduced drama. The journey from recognizing these unhealthy patterns to building healthier relationships and a stronger sense of self is deeply personal and often challenging. It requires honesty about what you've experienced, courage to make difficult changes, support from others, and patience with yourself as you heal and grow. But the alternative, continuing to remain in situations that damage your well-being, self-esteem, and ability to experience genuine intimacy and connection represents a far greater cost. You deserve relationships that enhance your life rather than diminishing it, that build you up rather than tearing you down. Create genuine intimacy based on mutual care rather than manipulation and control. If you've recognized yourself in these descriptions, if you felt that uncomfortable recognition that comes from seeing your own experiences reflected in the warning signs discussed, know that you're not alone in this struggle. Countless people have found themselves caught in similar dynamics, felt the same confusing mix of love and pain, hope and despair, attachment and awareness that something is terribly wrong. Many of those people have successfully freed themselves from these unhealthy patterns and gone on to build lives and relationships that truly nourish them. Path forward exists for you as well, even though from where you're standing right now, it might be difficult to see or believe in. The first and often hardest step involves simply acknowledging the reality of your situation rather than continuing to minimize, rationalize, or excuse it. This acknowledgement doesn't require you to immediately end the relationship or make any other drastic changes. It simply means looking honestly at the patterns present in your relationship and recognizing them for what they are, unhealthy dynamics that are causing you harm regardless of the positive moments that also exist. This honest assessment creates the foundation for whatever steps you choose to take next, whether that involves working to establish better boundaries within the relationship, seeking couples counseling if your partner is willing to genuinely engage in that process, or ultimately deciding that the healthiest choice involves ending the relationship entirely. Your well-being, safety, and right to be treated with consistent respect and care should never be negotiable or dependent on someone else's mood or your ability to perfectly meet their expectations. You deserve relationships where you feel secure rather than anxious. You can be yourself rather than constantly adjusting to avoid criticism. Conflicts are resolved through communication rather than through manipulation or physical connection, and where your growth and autonomy are supported rather than undermined. These things aren't unrealistic expectations or setting the bar too high. They're basic requirements for relationships that genuinely serve the well-being of everyone involved. Moving forward from here, wherever that movement takes you, represents an act of self-respect and self-care. It acknowledges your worth and your right to relationships and experiences that honor rather than harm you. The road ahead may not be easy, likely be moments of doubt, grief, longing, and uncertainty. But each step you take toward healthier patterns of relating to yourself and others represents progress toward a life where your intimate relationships enhance your well-being rather than diminishing it. Physical intimacy expresses genuine care rather than serving as a tool for manipulation, and where you can experience the deep, stable connection that humans are capable of when relationships are built on mutual respect and authentic care for each other's well-being.